In our continuing series as we've been going through Mark, the first half of the book, we were looking at the unexpected kingdom. And now this second half, as we continue in the fall, we're looking at the unexpected king. But before we get into Mark 11, I want to tell you a little bit about the book of Exodus. Now, I want you to stay with me here because I promise you there is a connection. So currently, right now, in the men's discipleship group that we have here at church, the men and I are reading through the Bible. And this week, we're in the book of Exodus. And this week, we're in chapters 21 through 24. Now, we've already read about God's amazing deliverance from his people with Pharaoh, from the hand of Pharaoh. The miracle of the Red Sea, the giving of the Ten Commandments. We have read through that amazing epic of a story of God's goodness and faithfulness and power. But this week, we're sitting in chapters 21 and 24, where you read about God giving his law. And these laws, they're things like about personal injury, how to interact with society, laws about legal matters, about festivals, about Sabbaths. And when you first read it, you're just like, these are just laws. But then you see at the end of chapter 23, God promises his guidance, protection, and blessing if his covenant, which is the laws God's giving to his people, are kept. And then in chapter 24, Moses reads these laws out loud to the people. And here's what he says in Exodus 24:3. Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words the Lord has spoken, we will do. Now, I'm sharing this with you to start our time because it struck me in our reading how much this in Exodus is so much connected with Mark, especially Mark 11, where we're going to be today. You see, in Exodus, God rescued his people to be with him. He freed them from slavery not because of their merit, not because of what they did, but because of his grace he extended to them. This entire relationship that he has now set up, which includes the giving of his law that I just mentioned from 21 to 24 in Exodus, all of that was built on grace. All of that was built on love. Here he is, if you think of him as king, he's establishing his rule, and it was always rooted first and foremost in love and grace. He wasn't saying to the Israelites, if you obey me, then I'll save you. He's saying, I have saved you, therefore live as my people. Live in fellowship with me. This law was like a charter from a king to say, live with me in fellowship. Live in my kingdom. Here's how you reflect me. And with one voice, as you see here, they all say, we will. But as you have ever seen in the Old Testament, through the entirety of this story, again and again and again, the people of God rebel against what their king commands. And then we see God again and again and again judging his people for their rebellion, and then again and again and again entering into their lives, drawing into their lives to bring him back to himself. You see this pattern throughout the entirety of Israel's history. In fact, Tim Keller, in his book, King's Cross, which he goes into the book of Mark, writes this about the story of Israel. The story of the Old Testament is the story of a people who again and again break the covenant. And yet God, as king, comes again and again to draw again and again in grace. Some people might be turned off by the Old Testament because they might have looked at God and said, well, he's showing his authority. He's being judgmental. This kind of makes me feel bad. But what we see is in God's judgment, in God's calling out, what he's really doing is in love is calling out to draw in. And that's where we're at in Mark today. In Mark, we have an unexpected king. You see, the Gospel of Mark has already shown us God's grace in Jesus, the promised king, who's already coming in to make all things right. He's coming in with authority to heal the broken, with authority to forgive sins, with authority to call people to enter into his kingdom. And then in Mark 11, where we're going to be today, Mark wants to clearly show us as readers, the king has come again. Yet what many expected Jesus as king, as the Messiah, what they were expecting was not what they were going to get. Many thought he was coming to walk in to judge the Romans. But instead, we're going to find him judging his people. They thought Jesus was going to come and flip the tables of those in power. Instead, he's going to flip the tables of his own people. And they thought Jesus was going to come and conquer the land with a sword. Instead, he's going to teach his people, like he did in the Old Testament, to draw near to him. And in our time today, I want us to see this in Mark. That the unexpected king exercises his authority in order to draw us near to him. That this King Jesus comes and he judges and he turns tables, not out of anger to push away, but in order to draw in. And so that is where we're going to be in Mark 11 today. So if you open up your Bibles, you'll see in Mark 11, just in the first verse, that Mark is setting a clear narrative and a sense of purpose. He wants to show with clarity that Jesus is the king and that he is entering the royal city of Jerusalem as king. And you'll see in verse 1, verse 11, and verse 27 the phrase, they drew near to Jerusalem. He entered Jerusalem. And they came again to Jerusalem. In all those verses, Mark is making clear the king has come. Paul Barnett, in his commentary about this, and Mark, the servant king, points this purpose out when he says, by his dramatic arrival in Jerusalem, Jesus now publicly declared himself to be the Messiah, the King of the Jews. Up to this point, Jesus had kept his messiahship secret. Now he announced it clearly for everyone to see. Jesus, by coming in on a donkey, with everyone yelling, Hosanna, everything he's doing, every Jew there would have been brought back to what they heard or read in the Old Testament and would have started making connections. The king has come. He is here. Which would have left them in anticipation of what he's going to do. And what we see in Mark, the first thing we see Jesus the King do is he comes to judge. So let's read in Mark's 11:12-14. On the following day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And his disciples heard it. Jesus' first act as king, coming into Jerusalem, was to yell and curse at a tree. Now, upon first reading, upon first hearing, even the disciples, they must have been floored and shocked. Here they've been with Jesus for 3 years, seeing him do incredible things. And now as they're entering into Jerusalem, he turns to a tree and starts cursing it, starts judging it. This might have seemed a bit odd. Yet we have to remember that Mark is including this in his narrative with a purpose. So there's a reason. It's not just Jesus cranky or hangry and yelling at the tree. There is a purpose here with what he's doing. So what is it about this fig tree that we have to pay close attention to? Well, in order to understand that, we need to become fig tree experts. So I'm going to make you fig tree experts today. You didn't know that was going to happen, but it's going to happen. So in order to understand a fig tree, in March and April is when the first figs would start to show. They're called early figs. And they would appear just before the leaves. So leaves would start blooming and early figs could come into place, even before a full harvest, which was more near the end of summer, the beginning of fall. So, and these figs would have been edible. Anybody in Israel would have known if they saw leaves coming from a fig tree early, there was a good chance for some figs to be there. There was an excitement. Oh, yes, it's coming early. So this isn't anything new or out of the ordinary. They would have all known that. They would have been believing that there was fruit to be had from this tree, but only to come close and see, as Jesus saw, that it was barren. It would be very frustrating because it would not have been what they were hoping for. You were fooled into thinking that the tree was fruitful when it actually had nothing to offer. And that can be frustrating for anyone. So Jesus is sitting here going and looking, and he's like, where's this fruit I'm expecting? So it reminds me of a few years back when my family was a part of the Eckert Life Group. Now, if you're part of any life group, at least for me, one of my favorite things is the snacks. Because there's some good food in some of these life groups. On this particular day, the Veiths, who were a part of that life group, were coming in, and lo and behold, what does Andrew Veith, their son, come walking in with? A box of Yum Yums. Now, I'm already thinking of the donut possibilities. Chocolate Thunder, White Lightning, Boston Cream, Coconut Caramel. Yes, I love Yum Yum, right? So I'm excited. So he comes in and he goes to offer the box to me. And I go, he's like, yeah, grab one. I go to grab the box. I notice it's a little light, but I don't think anything of it until I open it, and all that's in there is a couple broccolis. It was a prank he was playing, and he decided to play on all of us. Now, you can imagine what my feeling was at the moment. There's nothing in this box. It had the appearance, it had the look, it had the excitement of something in there, but there was nothing in there. I didn't lay judgment on Andrew or the box, but I wanted to, okay? But I didn't have the means to. It's rough. It's that feeling of like you're so excited. You know, you're looking at it going, yeah, there's supposed to be something there. And then when you go there, it's not there. It's frustrating. And that's where Jesus is. He's looking at this tree, not as a tree of like, oh, I didn't get the fruit I want, but he's looking at it for so much more. Because he sees the tree as so much more. And there's one more thing you need to understand about fig trees and why Jesus is so upset at this particular one not growing its fruit. Because fig trees biblically represented Israel. Oh, there's the Yum Yums there. Forgot I had that in there. In Hosea 9:10, it says this, like grapes in the wilderness, I found Israel. Like the first fruit on the fig tree in its first season, I saw your fathers. Or in the book of Jeremiah, where the Lord is seeing the people act wickedly, foolishly, trusting in themselves rather than in him, he shares with them how he's looking for this harvest of fruit from his people. And here's what he says he discovered. And look at the connection between Jeremiah and what we read in Mark. When I would gather them, Israel, declares the Lord, there are no grapes on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree. Even the leaves are withered, and what I gave them has passed away from them. Jesus isn't just judging a tree because he's hungry. He's making a point. He's making a point to say, I'm about to enter into Israel who should be bearing fruit, who's showing all the leaves and showing all the fruit, yet they are lacking none of it. Now, this judgment might seem unloving to us. It might seem unloving by Jesus. We might object, right, in our own hearts if we look at ourselves and say, how could Jesus be judging them? They're doing this and this and this. They're worshiping in the temple. They're doing this. Or we might even look at our own lives and say, I'm reading my Bible. I'm attending church regularly. I'm involved in events. I do a lot of good for others. But there's no fruit behind what's being done. I like what Greg Lanier says. He's a New Testament professor at Reformed Theological Seminary in Florida. And he writes this about the idea of living our lives in leaf without bearing any fruit. Our personal lives can look like in leaf. Our leaves may look like those of a supermom, a winner, a perfect family, an 18 Christian with an overstuffed schedule of ministry activities. But the root may be withered. There may be no fruit of holiness and no intimacy with God. And what's worse, our leaves may even fool us. It's just leaves without growing any fruit. What Jesus is saying, everything Israel's doing from the outside, it looks good. You're dressing it up nicely, but where's the fruit? Where's the fruit that I'm really looking for, Israel? You're lacking it. Where is the fruit, Church of God? You're lacking it. That's what he's judging. There's love in that judgment. Because the fruit that we are supposed to bear is good for us in our lives before the Lord, and it's good for others. Look at Galatians 5:22 and 23, where it says the idea of fruit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. This is the fruit that must be showing in our lives. This is the good fruit for us in our relationship before him, and this fruit is also good for those all around us. If Israel was bearing this fruit, it wouldn't have just been good for them as a nation. It would have been good for all the nations they were with. We can do so many things that we think we're doing great on the outside. We are more than capable of growing leaves. But do these produce the kinds of fruit in our lives that Jesus is calling us for? Jesus calls us out. Jesus judges us when he sees the leaves in our lives, not as out of anger and be done with us. But he calls us out to say, that's not what I want, and here's what needs to you have. He's actually drawing near to us in love through that judgment. If we're not bearing in fruit with him, we're not in fellowship with him. He has to call us out on it. And that's what he's doing with Israel and the fig tree, and that's what he does with us when we read it today. The king is exercising his judgment. Jesus is judging in order to draw us near to him, who's the only one that offers life. But he doesn't stop there at the fig tree. He's going to have a second act as king, where he's not only going to judge the fruit in our lives or lack thereof, he's going to turn the tables in our hearts. I want you to now turn to Mark 11, 15, and 19. And they came to Jerusalem. So this is right after the fig tree. It's fresh in everybody's minds. And they came to Jerusalem. And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons, and he would not allow anyone to carry anything in the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, "Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers?" And the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out into the city. So if you thought the disciples and the people around Jesus were shocked at what he did with the tree, they were absolutely horrified at what he's now doing in the holiest places for a Jew, was the temple. Here comes Jesus walking in, and he is if you read some of the other Gospels, they all recorded he's got a cord of whips. I mean, he is turning these tables over. He is knocking everything around. He is creating a commotion, and he is calling them out. This isn't just some quiet scene on the corner. Everyone's seeing this. Now, we as a modern reader, when we read this, it's hard to connect with what's really going on, so we have to have eyes of a Jew, of an Israelite, at this time in the temple. So I made you fig experts. Now I'm going to try to make you temple experts. Okay? So here's a picture of the temple. So you see where it says the court of priests. That's like the inner, like only the priests can enter into there. But if you see out on the side, there's an area called the court of the Gentiles. Okay? This is where many believe Jesus was overturning the tables. This is where he believed it happened. Okay? This area wasn't just for the Jews. This area, Gentiles, those were who non-Jewish. Anyone from all nations coming in to worship God could enter into the court of Gentiles. It was about as close as you could get to God, per se, as a non-Jew. Now, this area was huge. It was about 500 to 350 yards. So I want you to think 5 football fields by 3.5 football fields. It occupied about 35 acres of land, which was about 1/4 the size of the entire temple. This is a big area. So this is where Jesus is, overturning the tables. There are people from all over the place in this area. This space was also where the merchants were selling the animals and the money changers were exchanging coins for the temple offerings. So to understand why you need to know that, what would happen is people are traveling from all over, some from far distances. This is Passover time, so they're coming to worship. They're coming to do Passover, which means they're coming to sacrifice. And it was much easier to go to the court of Gentiles, to the temple, to buy the sacrifice than it was to bring it with you. Many of the Jewish leaders knew this in the court of Gentiles. So what did they start to do? Well, in order to buy a sacrifice, you can only use the coins that are in the temple. So you had to take your money and you had to transfer it to the temple coins. Well, let's up the price on that one. Let's jack it up. Where else are they going to go for it? They have to come to us. And now you've done that, now you've got to go get the animal. Let's jack up the price on that one too. So that's what's happening. And the Jewish leaders, those who are supposed to be bearing the fruit of love, gentleness, patience, kindness, those who are supposed to be a reflection of their king, their God, are quite the opposite. They're jacking up these prices. It's almost like if you're at a baseball game, if you've ever been to one, and you want to get a hot dog and it's $10 and it's a water bottle for $8. And you can't do anything about it because you can't go anywhere else and you're hungry and you're thirsty. That's what they're doing here. They're yelling, pigeons, pigeons for sale, not donkeys, sheep over here. Like they're yelling all kinds of animals. It's just like, there's a commotion going on. And so Jesus going in here is thinking, this isn't my place. This isn't what it was meant to be. Now, why would he think it wasn't meant to be? Because this part of the temple, all the way back to Abraham, God called Abraham to be a blessing to all the nations. Israel had a mission from the beginning to proclaim the truth of God, not just to themselves, but to all the people of God. With the money lending, the selling of sacrifices at such high prices, it's making it near impossible for the Gentiles to take part in this blessing. It's making it difficult for God's people to take part in it. It's hindering their worship to God. That's the problem. It's stopping worship of God. In fact, it's perverting it. Look at what R.C. Sproul, the late R.C. Sproul, says this on this passage. So here was the church. Now he's talking about Israel and the temple. He's just using the word church. The exquisite building of the temple that had been dedicated to the glory of God, and Jesus said, "My Father's house was built to be a house of prayer, and you've turned it into a den of thieves." The whole purpose of my church has been warped and distorted and turned into corruption. Anyone else walking into this place would only have seen a hustle and bustle and a court teeming with vendors. They most likely wouldn't have thought anything about it because it all seemed normal to them. This is just what we do. We follow the law, we do the sacrifice, we're just check, 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 check. Jesus doesn't see it that way. Jesus doesn't look at it that way. Jesus is passionate and righteously angry over what he is witnessing because it isn't worship of his Father, it's a perversion of that worship. Warren Weiserby said that the temple was to be a place where people met God in prayer, but the leaders had perverted it into a place where outsiders were exploited. They turned their worship into empty ritual and selfish gain. The worship of God, true worship, was always meant to display God's glory, not distract from them. Jesus is turning over the tables because all of that has become a distraction for the true worship of God, which what it was meant to be. Those tables were set up to take away from God's glory. Jesus is coming and saying, enough. True worship has to occur in my Father's house. Glorifying my Father is what's to happen here. So for us today, how have we set up tables in our own hearts that distract and take away from the worship of God? How have we set up tables in our lives that distract and take away from glorifying him in true worship? Are we going through the motions? Are we going through the checklists? Are we attending church? Are we singing these songs? Are we participating in things within our church and in our lives? But we don't have a genuine heart devotion to the Lord. We're doing it just to get somewhere, not to be in fellowship with him. That's the table set up before us. That's the table we're setting up before him in the worship. It's a table simply checking off boxes, doing more for ourselves than for the true worship of him. We have to ask ourselves almost daily, am I truly meeting God? Or am I just crossing off a checklist? Am I simply performing for him and others? Or am I longing to really be with him? Because if you're worshiping him, longing to really be with him, well, then those tables aren't going to be set up to distract, and the fruit is going to show. Our every devotion is going to be focused on our true King and not on ourselves. And what does Paul say about true worship, and what does it really look like? Well, in Colossians 3:16 to 17, it says this. I apologize if you see it cut off. That was my fault when it transferred. It's Colossians 3:16 and 17. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. That's the table you want to set. That's the fruit you want to see grow. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing songs and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. And whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Through him. So now, here are the disciples, the religious leaders, the readers of Mark, and us. And we have just watched our King call out and judge the fruit in our lives and turn the tables in our worship. And now we're left with how to respond. What do we do? Well, you'll see in the rest of Mark 11, Mark provides us with two possible ways to approach Jesus in response to this. There's the way of the disciples. The disciples, when they see the tree, Peter sees it, and he says to him, Jesus, look, that tree you cursed, that tree you judged, it withered. In other words, it's like him going to Jesus and saying, Jesus, why did this happen? Like, what are you trying to teach me? What am I to learn from this? It's a posture of humbleness. It's a drawing in, which was God's purpose all along. And you'll see in the rest of Mark, Jesus actually responds to him with love and grace by teaching them. He starts with saying, have faith in God. Pray, seek me, put your trust in me, forgive as I forgive. In other words, what I'm trying to show you is that you are to bear fruit and have tables set for the worship of me, to reflect me. Follow me. And that's what the disciples are doing when they almost ask that question as to why. Why is this going on? What is going on? What am I seeing here with these tables turning and this tree being judged? And Jesus draws in like he does all the time. He says, let me teach you, because that's what I wanted. I wanted you to draw near to me. That's one response that we can have, and that is the right response. Because that's Christ's love in our lives when he judges us and turns the tables over in our lives. At the moment, we hate it. We are angry by it. But if we're all honest, when we look back, those are the moments in our lives where we praise God and say, God, I needed that. I needed that. And praise your name. So that's the response that we should have. But then Mark leaves off with another response. The religious leaders, the Pharisees, they come to Jesus too with a question. But their question is more of, who do you think you are? What authority do you have to do this? And Jesus, who has the authority of the heavens and the earth, doesn't answer them. He answers them with a question. And they recognize his authority even in the question. And they're too afraid to talk to him. And it says in there, he never responded to them. I don't want that response in life. Jesus doesn't want that response in life. So as the King enters our lives today, as we've heard his word, he's made himself known. The King has come. He's entered in. He's examining the fruit of your hearts, of my heart. He's turning over the tables over anything that's going to distract us from him. So you're left with a choice. Will you continue living for yourself, bearing no fruit, setting up tables that distract and take away from the worship of the one true God? Or are you going to follow him, to draw near to him because he's already drawing near to you with love, grace, and mercy? And that is where we see the unexpected King exercising his authority of judgment, of turning over tables, because he loves us so much that he knows that that is the best for us, to draw us near to him. If you pray with me. Father God, I know